December 7, 1941, 6 o'clock in the morning. 230 miles north of Oahu. Japanese aircraft carrier Akaji pitches and rolls in heavy seas as deck crews scramble to prepare aircraft for launch. Flight deck slippery with spray, pilots checking their planes one final time in the pre-dawn darkness. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida climbs into his Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber, settles into the cockpit, checks his watch, knows that in less than 2 hours, he'll be leading 183 aircraft toward Pearl Harbor in the first wave of an attack that will kill thousands of Americans and drag the United States into World War II. Admiral Kitty Nagamo commands the strike force from Akagi's bridge. 6 aircraft carriers carrying 414 aircraft that represent the most powerful naval aviation force ever assembled. The product of years of training and planning and preparation for this single mission. Nagamo is nervous despite his experience, worried about American carriers that might be in Pearl Harbor, worried about being detected before the attack, worried about what happens after they strike, whether this attack will achieve its strategic objective of crippling American naval power, or whether it will simply awaken a sleeping giant that Japan cannot defeat in prolonged war. The plan is brilliant in its audacity and terrible in its consequences. Conceived by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who understands America better than most Japanese leaders, who studied at Harvard and served as naval attaché in Washington, who knows American industrial capacity and believes Japan's only hope is knockout blow that destroys American Pacific Fleet before America can mobilize. Yamamoto opposed war with America, warned Japanese leadership that he could run wild for 6 months, but had no confidence in ultimate victory, was overruled by militarists who believed Japan's destiny required expansion and who convinced themselves America lacked will to fight. 6 carriers departed. Japan on November 26th, under strict radio silence, sailed north through rough seas toward launch point. Crews briefed on their target just days before the attack. The operational security is extraordinary. Even Japanese diplomats in Washington don't know attack is coming, continue negotiating while their military prepares to strike. This deception will make the attack even more shocking to Americans, will create lasting outrage about Japanese treachery, about attacking while negotiations continued, about killing Americans without declaration of war. At 7 o'clock, the first wave launches. 183 aircraft lifting off from 6 carriers, despite heavy seas that make takeoffs dangerous. Bombers and torpedo planes, and fighters climbing into cloudy sky and forming up for flight to Oahu. Fuchida leads them south toward their target. Knows that success depends on surprise, that if Americans are alert and ready, the losses will be catastrophic. Japanese intelligence reports suggest Americans are unprepared, that ships are in harbor and aircraft are parked wingtip to wingtip on airfields. Perfect targets for an attack force that has trained intensively for this mission. Meanwhile, in Pearl Harbor, Sunday morning proceeds with peacetime routine, despite mounting tensions between America and Japan. Negotiations in Washington have reached impasse over Japanese expansion in China and Indochina. American oil embargo is strangling Japanese economy. Both sides know war is increasingly likely. But no one expects attack on Pearl Harbor. American military leaders believe Japan will strike in Philippines or Malaya or Dutch East Indies, not across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean to attack American territory in Hawaii. Sailors and soldiers sleep late on Sunday morning or eat breakfast or attend church services. Officers make plans for golf or beach outings. The weekend proceeds normally except for the few men on duty who perform their tasks with peacetime casualness. Battleship Row presents a tempting target with 8 battleships moored along Ford Island. Destroyers and cruisers and auxiliary vessels fill the harbor. Dozens of warships concentrated in small area with minimal protection against air attack. Aircraft are parked close together on airfields to prevent sabotage, which makes them vulnerable to air attack. But commanders worry more about saboteurs than about Japanese bombers. At 7:39 a.m., radar operators at Opana Point on Oahu's northern shore detect large formation of aircraft approaching from the north, 132 miles away and closing. Private Joseph Lockard calls the information center to report the contact. Speaks to Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, who is inexperienced and who assumes the radar contact must be American B-17 bombers expected to arrive from California that morning. Tyler tells Lockard, "Don't worry about it. The contact is dismissed." The one warning that might have provided precious minutes to prepare for the attack is ignored through combination of inexperience and peacetime, assumptions that prove catastrophic. At 7:48 a.m., Fuchida reaches Oahu and sees Pearl Harbor below him. Sees the ships moored peacefully in the harbor. Sees no fighters rising to intercept. No anti-aircraft fire. Realizes they've achieved complete surprise. He radios back to the carriers, "Tora, Tora." The code phrase meaning surprise has been achieved, then orders his pilots to attack. Japanese aircraft dive toward their targets. Torpedo bombers heading for Battleship Row. High-level bombers approaching from altitude. Dive bombers targeting airfields and aircraft. Fighters strafing anything that moves. The first bomb falls at 7:55 a.m. on Ford Island Seaplane Base, closely followed by torpedo impacts against battleships moored along the eastern side of Ford Island. USS Oklahoma takes 3 torpedoes in quick succession. Begins listing heavily to port as water floods compartments below the waterline. Capsizes within minutes, trapping over 400 men inside the overturned hull. USS West Virginia takes multiple torpedo hits and begins settling. Her commander is killed on the bridge by shrapnel. Executive officer orders counterflooding that keeps the ship from capsizing, but she sinks. Upright into the harbor bottom. USS California takes 2 torpedoes and begins flooding. Damage control efforts are hampered by peacetime conditions. Many watertight doors are open for inspection. Ammunition lockers are locked with keys held by officers who aren't immediately available. The ship fights back, but is doomed. USS Nevada, moored alone at the northern end of Battleship Row, takes 1 torpedo hit forward, but gets underway despite the damage. The only battleship to sortie during the attack. Steaming slowly toward the harbor entrance while under concentrated attack from Japanese aircraft who want to sink her in the channel and block the harbor. USS Arizona explodes at 8:06 a.m. when armor-piercing bomb converted from 16-inch naval shell penetrates her forward magazine. The explosion is catastrophic, tears the ship apart, kills 1,177 men in seconds, more than half the American dead from the entire attack dying in that single explosion. The fireball rises hundreds of feet into the air. Burning oil spreads across the water. Survivors swim through flames, trying to reach shore or other ships. The scene is apocalyptic and will become the defining image of Pearl Harbor's tragedy. USS Tennessee and USS Maryland escape serious damage because they're moored inboard of other battleships that shield them from torpedoes. They take bomb hits but remain afloat and operational. USS Pennsylvania is in dry dock and also escapes torpedo attack but takes bomb damage. Within 20 minutes of the attack beginning, the Pacific Fleet's battleship force is effectively destroyed. 5 battleships sunk or sinking, 3 damaged. American naval power in the Pacific crippled in less time than it takes to eat breakfast. But the Japanese attacks also hit airfields across Oahu, catching American aircraft on the ground, parked close together for easy destruction. At Wheeler Field, Army fighters burn in rows as Japanese fighters strafe them. Pilots and ground crews who run toward their aircraft are cut down by machine gun fire. Hangars explode, fuel storage burns, the field is chaos of explosions and flames. At Hickam Field near Pearl Harbor, Japanese bombers destroy aircraft and facilities, kill dozens of men caught in barracks and on flight lines, catch American forces completely unprepared for air attack. At Kaneo Naval Air Station, flying boats burn at their moorings, hangars are destroyed. Defenders fight back with whatever weapons they can find, but are overwhelmed by surprise and by Japanese aerial superiority. The catalog of destruction continues across all American airfields on Oahu. Over 180 aircraft destroyed or damaged on the ground. American air power neutralized before it can respond effectively to the attack. A few American pilots managed to take off and shoot down several Japanese aircraft, but these are exceptions. Most American planes never leave the ground. American servicemen respond with courage and determination. Despite the shock and chaos, sailors man anti-aircraft guns that weren't ready at attack start. Feed ammunition by hand when normal supply systems are disrupted. Shoot back at Japanese aircraft despite being untrained for combat, and despite many guns lacking ready ammunition. At various locations across Pearl Harbor, men display extraordinary heroism, rescuing shipmates from burning water, manning guns while under attack, attempting damage control under impossible conditions, refusing to abandon their posts even when death seems certain. Messman Doris Miller, an African-American sailor assigned to USS West Virginia, mans an anti-aircraft gun despite having no training on the weapon. Black sailors in 1941 are restricted to service roles and aren't trained for combat. But Miller fights back anyway and is later awarded the Navy Cross. Captain Mervyn Benyon of USS West Virginia is mortally wounded on his bridge but refuses to leave his post. Continues directing his ship's defense until he dies. Posthumously receives the Medal of Honor. These stories of heroism occur across Pearl Harbor as Americans respond to attack with courage that will become legendary. At 8:40 a.m., the first wave withdraws. Having achieved devastating success, Japanese aircraft head back toward their carriers, having lost just 9 aircraft to American fire. The Americans have 20 minutes to prepare for the second wave that will arrive at 8:54 a.m. with 171 aircraft targeting facilities and ships that survived the first attack. The second wave finds Americans more alert and ready. Anti-aircraft fire is heavier. Defending fighters are in the air. But the damage continues as Japanese dive bombers attack ships and facilities with high explosives. USS Nevada, still attempting to reach the harbor entrance despite heavy damage from first wave, comes under concentrated attack during second wave, takes multiple bomb hits, and is urged to beach herself rather than sink in the channel and block it. She runs aground near the entrance, her attempted sortie unsuccessful, but her sacrifice preventing worse disaster if she'd sunk in the channel. Other ships take additional damage during second wave. Dry docks and repair facilities are hit. Oil storage tanks somehow escape serious damage, despite being obvious targets. Nanyumo's decision not to launch third wave against these shore facilities will prove crucial to American recovery. By 9:45 a.m., the second wave withdraws. The attack is over, lasting less than 2 hours, but changing everything. Pearl Harbor burns. Black smoke rises thousands of feet into the air visible from across the island. The harbor is chaos of burning ships and spreading oil and struggling survivors and frantic rescue efforts. The final toll is staggering. 2,403 Americans killed, 1,178 wounded, 8 battleships sunk or damaged, 3 cruisers damaged, 3 destroyers damaged, and over 180 aircraft destroyed or damaged. The Pacific Fleet's battle line is destroyed. American naval power in the Pacific is crippled. Japanese have achieved tactical success beyond their expectations, but strategic success is more questionable. Because the attack fails to destroy American aircraft carriers that weren't in port that day. USS Enterprise is returning from delivering aircraft to Wake Island. USS Lexington is delivering aircraft to Midway. USS Saratoga is in California undergoing maintenance. All three carriers survive and will form the core of American naval aviation that will eventually destroy the Japanese fleet. The attack also fails to destroy Pearl Harbor's repair facilities, fuel storage, and submarine base, all of which will prove crucial to American ability to fight back in coming months. More importantly, the attack unifies American public opinion in favor of war, eliminates the isolationist sentiment that had kept America out of the conflict, creates determination to defeat Japan regardless of cost or time required. Before Pearl Harbor, America was deeply divided about entering the war. Isolationists argued that European and Asian conflicts weren't America's concern. Interventionists argued that Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan threatened American interests and values. Pearl Harbor ends this debate instantly. The attack on American territory makes war inevitable and makes American determination absolute. President Franklin Roosevelt learns of the attack while having lunch at the White House. Receives phone call from Secretary of War Henry Stimson reporting that Pearl Harbor is under attack. Initially has trouble believing the news because attacking Pearl Harbor seems so unlikely. As reports come in confirming the attack and its severity, Roosevelt begins preparing for war, calls cabinet meeting, begins drafting speech he'll deliver to Congress requesting declaration of war, understands that this day will define his presidency and will change America's role in the world permanently. December 8th. Roosevelt addresses joint session of Congress with speech that becomes one of the most famous in American history. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The speech is short, just 6 minutes, but powerful in its directness and clarity. Roosevelt asks Congress to declare that a state of war exists between the United States and Japan. Congress votes for war with just one dissenting vote. Representative Jeannette Rankin of Montana, a pacifist who also voted against World War I. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States, honoring their alliance with Japan. Roosevelt asks Congress for declarations of war against Germany and Italy. Congress complies. Now America is at war with all three Axis powers. The declarations transform World War II from European and Asian regional conflicts into truly global war. American industrial and military power will eventually tip the balance decisively in favor of the Allies. But in December 1941, this outcome is far from certain. America must mobilize and train and build before it can fight effectively. The immediate aftermath at Pearl Harbor is grim work of rescue and recovery. Sailors trapped in capsized USS Oklahoma tap out messages on the hull asking for rescue. Ship fitters work frantically to cut through the hull and pull men out. They save 32 men, but hundreds remain trapped as air runs out and water rises. USS Arizona burns for days. The oil leaking from her ruptured tanks feeds fires that make recovery of bodies impossible for weeks. Eventually, 1,102 men from Arizona are never recovered, remain entombed in the ship that becomes their memorial. The investigation into how the attack succeeded begins immediately. Commanders in Hawaii are blamed for lack of preparedness. Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short are relieved of command and will spend rest of their lives defending their actions and arguing they were scapegoated for failures that extended to Washington. The investigations reveal multiple intelligence failures, warnings that weren't heeded, assumptions that proved wrong. Organizational dysfunctions that prevented information from reaching decision-makers who might have acted on it. American intelligence had intercepted Japanese diplomatic messages indicating that war was imminent. The famous winds message and other signals suggested attack was coming. But no one predicted Pearl Harbor as the target. American leaders assumed Japan would strike in Southeast Asia or Philippines. They sent warnings to Pacific commands, but these warnings emphasized sabotage threats rather than air attack, led to aircraft being bunched together for protection, which made them vulnerable to the very air attack that materialized. The failure to predict Pearl Harbor attack represents massive intelligence failure, but also reflects limitations of intelligence work and difficulty of predicting enemy actions when deception is effective. The question of whether Roosevelt knew about the attack in advance and allowed it to happen to bring America into war is persistent conspiracy theory that serious historians universally reject. The evidence shows Roosevelt and his advisors were surprised by the attack, didn't expect Japan to strike Pearl Harbor, couldn't have allowed the attack even if they'd wanted to provoke war because the political and military costs were too high. Roosevelt wanted to support Britain and China against Axis powers, but he wasn't willing to sacrifice the Pacific Fleet to create casus belli. The conspiracy theories ignore evidence and logic in favor of dramatic narrative. Japanese reaction to the attack is mixed. Yamamoto, who planned it, reportedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve," though this quote may be apocryphal. Japanese leadership celebrates tactical success, but some recognize that they've started a war they probably can't win, that American industrial capacity will eventually overwhelm Japan's limited resources, that the attack guarantees America will fight to unconditional surrender rather than accepting negotiated peace. Japanese propaganda presents Pearl Harbor as glorious victory. Fuchida becomes national hero. But thoughtful Japanese officers understand they've begun countdown to Japan's defeat. The American recovery from Pearl Harbor is remarkably swift given the devastation. Salvage operations begin within days of the attack. Naval engineers assess damage and begin planning how to raise sunken ships and repair damaged ones. USS Nevada, USS California, and USS West Virginia are raised and eventually returned to service after extensive repairs. They'll participate in later battles, including the invasion of Normandy and the Philippines campaign. USS Oklahoma is raised but too damaged to repair. She's scrapped. USS Arizona remains where she sank, becomes a memorial to the men who died there. Oil still leaks from her hull 8 decades later. The repair facilities and infrastructure that Japanese failed to destroy become crucial to American recovery. Pearl Harbor remains operational as major naval base throughout the war. Supports submarine operations that will devastate Japanese merchant marine. Serves as staging area for amphibious operations across the Pacific. American submarines operating from Pearl Harbor will sink over 1,300 Japanese merchant ships. Cripple Japan's ability to import raw materials and oil. Starve Japanese industry and military of resources needed to sustain war effort. The submarine campaign from Pearl Harbor achieves strategic success. That dwarfs the tactical success of the Japanese. Attack. American aircraft carriers that survived Pearl Harbor because they weren't in port form the core of American naval aviation that will fight back against Japan. USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga will participate in every major carrier battle of 1942, from raids on Japanese-held islands to the Battle of Coral Sea to Midway, where American carriers will sink 4 Japanese carriers and turn the tide in the Pacific. The survival of these carriers makes possible American naval victories that will eventually defeat the Japanese fleet. If the carriers had been in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, war in the Pacific would have lasted longer and cost more American lives. The strategic impact of Pearl Harbor extends far beyond the immediate military consequences. The attack transforms American society and economy. Mobilization proceeds at unprecedented pace. Factories that produced cars and appliances switch to producing tanks and aircraft. Women enter workforce in massive numbers to replace men entering military service. Rationing and price controls manage civilian economy to support war effort. American industrial production expands dramatically. By 1943, America is producing more war material than all other combatants combined. The arsenal of democracy that Roosevelt promised becomes reality. American military grows from 1.6 million men in 1941 to over 12 million by 1945. Young men volunteer or are drafted, train in hastily expanded camps, deploy overseas to fight in Europe and Pacific and North Africa and Asia. Women serve in auxiliary roles, as nurses and in women's services like WACs and WAVES, contribute to war effort in ways that expand women's roles in American society. African Americans serve in segregated units, face discrimination even while fighting for their country. Their service and sacrifice will contribute to post-war civil rights movement that challenges segregation and inequality. Pearl Harbor also affects Japanese Americans disastrously. Fear and prejudice lead to Executive Order 9066 in February 1942, ordering internment of over 110,000 Japanese Americans from West Coast. Most are American citizens who lose homes and businesses and freedom for duration of the war, interned in camps in interior states under harsh conditions. This internment represents one of the darkest chapters in American history. Violation of civil liberties motivated by racism and war hysteria rather than by any evidence of disloyalty. Most internees remain loyal to America despite this treatment. Many serve in military, including 442nd Regimental Combat Team that becomes most decorated unit in American military history. The memory of Pearl Harbor shapes American strategic thinking for generations. Remember Pearl Harbor becomes rallying cry during the war, reminder of why America fights and what happens when America is unprepared. After the war, Pearl Harbor becomes lesson about danger of surprise attack, influences Cold War policies about maintaining strong military and intelligence capabilities, shapes debates about preemptive action and about how to prevent future Pearl Harbors. The attack validates arguments for forward defense and for maintaining military readiness even in peacetime. Every subsequent surprise attack from North Korea to 9/11 prompts comparisons to Pearl Harbor. The survivors of Pearl Harbor carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Many suffer from what we now call PTSD, nightmares about burning ships and drowning shipmates. Survivors' guilt about living when so many died. Anger at Japanese for the attack and at American leaders for being unprepared. Many survivors refuse to discuss their experiences, find the memories too painful, can't explain to people who weren't there what it was like to experience that morning. Others become public advocates, telling their stories to ensure Pearl Harbor is remembered, participating in memorial ceremonies, educating new generations about the attack and its significance. The USS Arizona Memorial, built over the sunken battleship, becomes the most visited site in Hawaii. Over 1.8 million people visit annually to honor the dead and to remember the attack. The memorial is dedicated in 1962, designed by architect Alfred Pries, who was himself detained after Pearl Harbor because he was born in Austria. The design symbolizes initial defeat and ultimate victory with its sagging center and raised ends. Survivors gather there for annual commemorations on December 7th, their numbers dwindling as time passes. By 2021 only, about 75 Pearl Harbor survivors remain alive from the over 87,000 military personnel present during the attack. Japan's relationship with Pearl Harbor memory is complex. The attack is source of shame for many Japanese who recognize it as active aggression that started disastrous war, but also source of pride for nationalists who see it as legitimate military operation against enemy that threatened Japan's interests. Japanese textbooks and public memory tend to emphasize Japan's suffering from atomic bombs and firebombing rather than dwelling on Pearl Harbor. This selective memory creates tensions with Americans who feel Japan hasn't adequately acknowledged responsibility for starting the Pacific War. The debate about Roosevelt's knowledge continues despite historical consensus rejecting conspiracy theories. Each new declassified document is examined for evidence that Roosevelt knew. Various books and documentaries promote conspiracy narratives, but serious scholars find no credible evidence supporting the claim that Roosevelt allowed attack to happen. The conspiracy theories persist because Pearl Harbor seemed so consequential that some people can't accept it resulted from intelligence failures and Japanese deception rather than from deliberate American decision to let it happen. The question of whether the attack was strategically wise for Japan remains debated. Some argue that Japan had no choice given American oil embargo, and that attacking Pearl Harbor was a logical attempt to create space for Japanese expansion in Southeast Asia. Others argue that attacking America was fundamentally stupid, that Japan couldn't win prolonged war against American industrial capacity, that negotiated settlement would have been wiser than military confrontation. Yamamoto himself doubted Japan could win. His concerns were ignored by militarists who believed Japanese fighting spirit could overcome American material advantages. They were catastrophically wrong. The tactical success of Pearl Harbor attack influenced naval aviation doctrine worldwide, demonstrated that aircraft carriers had replaced battleships as dominant naval weapons, proved that air power could sink battleships in harbor despite claims by many naval officers that battleships were invulnerable. The attack validated theories of naval aviation pioneers like Billy Mitchell, who'd argued for primacy of air power, discredited battleship admirals who'd insisted that big guns and armor were still supreme, accelerated shift to carrier-based naval warfare that dominated Pacific War and continues to define naval operations today. The American response to Pearl Harbor demonstrates national resilience and determination, the ability to absorb catastrophic surprise attack and recover quickly, to mobilize national resources for total war, to maintain focus and commitment through years of difficult fighting. The generation that fought World War II after Pearl Harbor becomes greatest generation, celebrated for their sacrifice and achievement. Their response to Pearl Harbor attack becomes defining moment of their lives and source of pride that they answered the call and defeated tyranny despite initial setbacks. The lessons of Pearl Harbor about preparedness, about intelligence failures, about danger of underestimating adversaries, about importance of staying vigilant remain relevant in contemporary security debates. Each new surprise attack prompts questions about whether intelligence warnings were ignored, whether leaders failed to connect dots, whether organizational dysfunctions prevented appropriate response. Pearl Harbor becomes template for understanding intelligence failures and for trying to prevent future surprises, though preventing surprise attacks remains difficult because attackers have advantage of initiative and deception. The human cost of Pearl Harbor never fades for families who lost fathers, brothers, sons that morning, for communities that sent men to Hawaii who never came home, for survivors who carry memories and guilt for 80 years. The 2,403 dead are remembered individually on the memorial, their names inscribed, their sacrifice honored, but behind each name is a story of a life cut short, of potential unfulfilled, of families devastated. The youngest casualty was 17, the oldest was 62. They came from every state and from diverse backgrounds, united in death by serving their country at Pearl Harbor that morning. Remember Pearl Harbor not just as military history or as catalyst for American entry into World War II, but as human tragedy where thousands died in attack they didn't expect and couldn't prevent, where young men burned and drowned and suffocated while America awoke to reality that it was at war. Remember the heroes who fought back against overwhelming surprise, who rescued shipmates from burning water, who manned guns without training, who refused to surrender to shock and chaos. Remember the survivors who lived with memories and scars for rest of their lives, who ensured their shipmates' sacrifice wasn't forgotten. Remember Pearl Harbor as warning about what happens when nations fail to stay prepared, when intelligence failures allow enemy to achieve surprise, when assumptions about enemy intentions prove wrong. Remember it as example of American resilience and determination, how the nation responded to catastrophic attack by mobilizing completely and fighting back until victory was achieved. Remember that the date lives in infamy as Roosevelt promised, that December 7, 1941 remains one of the most significant days in American history, the day that changed everything. This is Pearl Harbor, 2 hours that killed thousands and awakened America to war it didn't want but had to fight. 2 hours that destroyed the Pacific Fleet's battle line, but failed to destroy American will or American capacity to strike back. The attack succeeded tactically, but failed strategically. Japan won the battle, but set in motion its own defeat by unifying American opinion and by guaranteeing that America would fight to unconditional Japanese surrender. This is the day of infamy, the day America entered World War II, the day that 2,403 Americans died, and that began countdown to Japan's defeat.